Ready? Yeah, good. Welcome to the only panel in Washington, D.C. today that is not on the Supreme Court's health care ruling. It remains relevant, however. My name is Bill Shambra, I'm director of Hudson Institute's Bradley Center for Philanthropy and Civic Renewal. Kristen McIntyre and I welcome you to today's panel entitled, What Would Jefferson Do? UVA and the Crisis of Liberal Education. I'm particularly grateful to Kristen and the Hudson Public Affairs staff, Grace Terzian, Jamie Bologna, and Perry Farbstein for putting this event together so quickly in just a couple of days and inconveniently placed as it is right before our next Bradley Center panel, which will be held tomorrow. That will be a discussion of Giving USA, the annual comprehensive report on who gave and who got what in 2010. Registration is closed for that event, but we will live stream it so you can watch it remotely. Now for today's event, I suppose you may be asking, what does the turmoil at UVA and in liberal education generally have to do with philanthropy and civic renewal? The partially truthful answer is that many of the trends with which universities are wrestling today, especially the growing popularity of notions like strategic dynamism and other B-school concepts, are also making serious incursions into the world of foundations and nonprofits. But the larger truth is that as I reflected on the turmoil surrounding past and future UVA President Teresa Sullivan, my mind suddenly experienced those wavy distortions that indicate we're about to enter a flashback. And I'll spare you the Wayne's World side of the sound effects. I was transported back to the fall of 1967 when several score terrified college freshmen took their first tentative steps onto the hallowed linoleum of Case Hall at Michigan State University. Now, in just 6 years, from 1960 to 1966, MSU's enrollment had increased by 75%, exploding from 24,000 to 42,000 students. In a nightmarish rendering of Clark Kerr's then popular vision of the multiversity, MSU now offered degrees in both liquid and solid packaging, along with hundreds of other pursuits not theretofore associated with a college degree. And President John Hanna's slogan for this school was, Michigan State University, where the concrete never dries. Russell Kirk, who had taught at MSU in the 50s, had come to call it a Behemoth State University. In the face of this unfolding horror, a few brave scholars and administrators thought that something might have been lost from the college experience amidst the Soviet-style housing towers of MSU. And so they plotted a counter-movement, the founding of a small enclave within the multiversity, where several hundred students would be invited, as its first brochure put it, to come live and learn in a residential environment and join in a community of mutually assisting scholars, studying questions like war and peace, poverty and opportunity, justice and democracy. Sounds almost like what we used to call, in the benighted pre-multiversity age, a liberal arts college. The new residential college, named for another Virginian, James Madison, would be housed in Case Hall, where all the students would live and the specially designated faculty would have their offices. Careful course scheduling by a Madison student would ensure that one could go the entire bleak Michigan winter term without setting foot once outside Case Hall, as long as you could persuade someone else to make the beer runs. Let me put your suspense at an end by confirming your growing suspicion that among those trembling freshmen in that first class at James Madison College were Bill Shambra and one Terry Sullivan, who of course could never have been talked into making a beer run. I should point out that among later alumni of Madison College, which is a going concern today, is to be found our own vice president at Hudson, John Walters. I've often wondered, as I've read about Terry Sullivan's ordeal at UVA, if she didn't recall her first effort to find some sort of traditional community of scholars in the face of what everyone was telling us then, was the unavoidable dismantling of liberal education in the name of irresistible contemporary trends in higher education. Okay, flashback over. We're back with today's panel, and I'm very grateful to all of them for coming together on such short notice. We'll hear first this morning from David Brenneman, university professor at the University of Virginia, who has served as director of UVA's public policy program at the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy and is dean of the Curry School of Education. Then we'll hear from James Caesar, presently the Harry F. Byrd Professor of Politics at the University of Virginia, and final, Michael Poliakoff, Policy Director at the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, and a longtime college teacher and administrator as well. So, Mr. Brenneman.
Thanks, Bill. This was a very quickly impaneled group of us. I was just learned about it, I think, yesterday, so I don't have prepared remarks. But I will try to be brief and set the stage a bit and take a point of view. Just so it's clear in terms of this, if you want to view this, which increasingly we changed, I think, the tone, but it was initially adversarial, and I was very much on Terry Sullivan's side and wanted her reinstated. You had asked me a week ago, would I have taken 100-to-1 bet that she'd be back in her position? I would have said you were crazy. I mean, we are witnessing, I think, something that is, as far as I can tell, if not unprecedented, so unusual and so rare as to generate an issue that I think will be debated and studied for years to come. It's a classic governance tale as much as anything, and as such, it's really, in some sense, a wrestling over the soul of the university. Whose university is this? Who owns it? Who runs it? Who can control it? Who makes decisions? How do people that make decisions get where they get? And now, of course, we're facing a new situation where we go back into a new world now with this behind us, and how that will play out will be, again, a part of the interesting story. Most of you, I'm sure, know how we got here in a sense, but I'll just give you one person's experience. I'm pretty close to, I had known Terry Sullivan for a couple of years before she became president. I served with her on and this is ironic, a National Research Council panel on measuring productivity in higher education, which just issued its report about 3 weeks ago. She chaired that panel. It was made up mostly of economists and the like. And so her interest in that subject is very deep and very real. But I had met her before. I had chaired the search that then brought the provost, John Simon, from Duke University to the university. So I was feeling, that I was pretty close, if not part of the inner circle. I'm no longer deaning, but I knew and was on a close contact basis with the leadership. And I was, again, stories out of tale. I was out playing golf on Sunday morning, June 10th, a beautiful day, and I remember I stopped for lunch, and ironically, the past president of the Faculty Senate was out there with a family, extended family, and he got up in the middle of lunch and came over to me with his iPhone, which I don't carry, and he said, "I can't believe it. President Sullivan has resigned," or has, exactly how it was phrased, I don't remember at that point. He was in shock. I was in shock. I can tell you there was not one human being other than the members of the board on that, and it's not even clear totally how many of them were initially engaged, but not one human being saw this coming. When presidents are toppled or anything like that, usually there's a chain of events and news stories and things happen, and people may lay their bets, but no one saw this coming. There was no indication to any of us that were at the university, as far as I know, that there was this deep rift occurring between the president and the board. She certainly hadn't described it as such. So it was a total shock, which may account for some part of the reaction to it as people gathered their wits and moved forward. One of the other ironies, the Faculty Senate of the university now has emerged, I think quite properly, as they're being lionized now as having helped to lead and organize this event over the last 2 weeks. That was a near moribund organization prior to this event. I had actually been asked by the provost if I'd work with them this summer trying to figure out how to get them up to the point where he could get some pushback. He was looking for a group that could speak for the faculty. And as I said to him the other day, I said, job done. I mean, that task is over. Now, what were the issues? And I'm going to now jump quickly to the title of Jim Caesar's excellent article in the Post, What Would Jefferson Do? I'm not a Jefferson scholar to any degree like many of my colleagues are, but it is interesting, when he set the university up, we did not have a president for the first 80 years. Our first president was Edmund Alderman, elected in 1905. Jefferson's view was the faculty would run the university with a board of visitors helping on some of the practical side. His view of student governance, which adheres to this day, is a very profound commitment to letting students run their own affairs. We have an honor code that played a very significant role, by the way, in the conversation about the last 2 weeks. We have an honor code which basically gives a student group the power and the authority to administer the honor code, no lying, stealing, or cheating. If a student is convicted by a student group of an offense, the only sanction is complete and permanent expulsion from the university. All that in the hands of the student. Administrators don't run it, students run it. So Jefferson, I would say that the answer to Jim's question is a slam dunk. Jefferson would have completely endorsed what happened here in the last 2 weeks in terms of the response to the Board of Visitors' action. I can't believe he would have in any way have thought that what this small group of visitors did very quietly among themselves and without much outside conversation would have been viewed as legitimate, if not accepted as a legitimate action on the part of those who were governed by it. And it was clearly not viewed as a legitimate action by those. We had a session on Sunday that was quite interesting. You could see the tones. The initial week and a half was adversarial. I mean, there was anger, and it grew, and people were being demonized, and it was taking on tones that I thought were not right or appropriate for the event. And to my great good pleasure, the students organized a rally on Sunday, and 20 some of us spoke. And I tried to reframe it out of this zero-sum win-loss. You know, the default mode in America now for any kind of dispute seems to be to immediately pick up sides, and they're going to be winners and losers. Nobody ever thinks about the possibility of non-zero-sum games where everybody can win. And I tried to write a piece which suggested that the Board of Visitors acted perhaps precipitously. They had acknowledged they had, but that a hallmark of intelligence and true leadership is to be willing to revisit decisions you make in the face of new information. And goodness knows the university community was giving them new information, and to their great credit. And I don't know all the inside processes that got us there. I was as pleased and as amazed and as really pleased that they did rethink it, and we had a very kind of coming together ceremony just last Tuesday. So where do we go from here? Let me turn now just to say a word or two about Michael's colleague Ann Neal's paper article in the Washington Post, which was published, I forget, maybe a week ago, from the American never get ACTA right.
American Council of
Trustees and Alumni. And I reread that essay this morning, and it appeared to me to be primarily focused on the cost-price issue, in point of fact, that universities are living in some sort of la-la land. That you didn't say this because, of course, the issue hadn't been settled, but it was almost as if you were saying, if this doesn't hold, you know, the inmates will be running the asylum, and the Board of Visitors will be severely weakened. That was actually a very severe concern, I think, on the part of several of the BOV members, that even if they had made a mistake, if they were to reverse it, it would make them look weak, and it would diminish them and empower others to be more significant in the roles of in the future of the university. I think it was an act of wonderful good wisdom, and I think it really was a bringing together of the community for them to have made those reversals. But now let's address the issues that both Ann Neal and the rector were putting out there, namely that the world is changing for public research universities, that the good old collegial way of running ourselves, which Terry Sullivan, I think, is an exemplar. Your comment about Michigan State, one of the things she told me was that when she was an undergraduate there, Cliff Wharton, who became president, always had one or two very bright undergraduates who worked with him closely in his presidential duties, and she was one of those, and he spotted her talent and urged her to go on and make a career in this business. So her roots go back far in that perspective. And the question is that as tuitions rise, talking at lunch here with several staff members and folks here who have children going to the university or about to go, and they're worried about tuition. Everybody's concerned about this. I haven't got time to try to go into a story about how this has evolved, but it is a serious problem. It's not to be dismissed. The trustees were definitely, or the visitors were definitely onto something. On the other hand, as I listened to the key things that the rector was pushing, I was hearing more a story about need for more revenue. I was not hearing a cost-cutting story. In fact, I went up and gave her a hug, actually, after the Tuesday event. I'd never met her before. Strange man walks up, gives you a hug. Anyway, we got acquainted. And she pulled me aside. She pulled me aside and said, one of the messages I tried to get out, and I guess we just couldn't get it out well enough, is that we were deeply concerned about the salaries of the faculty at the university. We wanted them increased. Now, God bless her. I'm all for that. That ain't cost cutting, folks. That's expense enhancement, and that means revenue enhancement. The big concern about online, which got into the press, seems to have been motivated by these most recent, to me, somewhat imponderable actions of Stanford, Harvard, and MIT, where these gigantic online courses are being thrown out into the ether, and Harvard and MIT apparently are putting $60 million into this effort. I can't, for the life of me, figure out what the heck they're doing. I can't. It doesn't seem to me to have any kind of sustainable business model, and as such, I'm not clear why online education was going to be the solution to the university's financial problem. So all of these are to be revealed. I will make one final sort of snarky comment, just because I enjoy doing that occasionally. Strategic dynamism is one of these nonsense terms that the business community fixes on, and then you see them in airport bookshops, 7 effective ways to do this, that, or anything. That isn't helpful. I mean, if anybody showed strategic dynamism, as I understand that term, it was our Board of Visitors. They adapted flexibly and rapidly to a changing circumstance. So God bless them. They finally got it right. Thank you.
Well, what's the meaning of the Charlottesville Spring? What does it portend for the future of the University of Virginia and for higher education? These are questions that many are asking today as the turmoil of the 16 days of June now winds down. Most probably people are seeking some meaning from this event. What does it mean and what can be said? I suppose if there were a deep meaning and something intelligent to be said, it would have already been said. And over the past week or two, I don't think anything really new has been added to the debate on higher education. Still, for many of those on the spot, as we were, it led to an exhilarating feeling of being involved in some kind of world historical event, as thousands of people in Johannesburg and Kuala Lumpur were following events at UVA, parsing every word, studying every memo. What was the import of the nuanced phrases in press conferences of the briefest interim presidency of all time? What was the real meaning of Rector Helen Dragis's red dress? And then what about those wild-eyed radicals trampling on the grass of UVA's famous lawn, channeling Thomas Jefferson and proclaiming, "The tree of education needs to be refreshed from time to time with the blood of professors and recalcitrant board members. It is its natural manure." Well, these heady days are over, I can assure you. And this time, for real, the world will little note no longer remember what we said there. Still, I'm happy to be here this afternoon to treat these issues at Hudson, a think tank reputed on balance to favor a more conservative than a liberal viewpoint, because the events have vexed conservatives and divided them more so than liberals. Liberals really have no problem and had no problem in taking sides in this event. In principle, liberals, I'm speaking now of liberals in the academy, they can be suspicious of both college presidents and of university governing boards, both, as both can be fit into the category of the establishment and both can be described as occupying prominent places in the top 1%. But in this case, with a woman president and a board comprised largely of business types, liberals were all agreed in declaiming and attacking the firing of President Sullivan. And I'll say my university was very fortunate in escaping, but just by an inch, one of the greatest cause célèbres we could have had from the left. If the rector of the university had not been a woman herself, and if she had not been appointed by the board of by Democratic Governor Tom Kean, but by Republican Governor Robert McDonnell, the Charlottesville Spring would have been item 1 on front page of the New York Times from the first day. It would have fit every stereotype that haunts and delights the leftist mind. I can see the headlines now. Right-wing board with business interests, oust first female president at UVA, ties being traced to Bain Capital. So let's leave liberal commentators out of this. It's the conservative response that seems to have been divided. An editorial in the Wall Street Journal sided with the Board of Visitors more or less. And there were a few sympathetic writings on that score, as well as from other sources, which I suppose could be said to be identified with people who are more conservative in tone. These are the facts. But is there any real connection between this event and conservatism? Is there any reasonable connection in the world between the Board of Visitors and the philosophy of ideas and values that they had and the philosophy of conservative thought, the things that really matter to conservatives in higher education? Here's the case for maybe arguing that there is a connection. It comes from the idea that there's some conservative philosophy, a business way of doing things, a business way of getting tough with the university. The board and rector represented this. They were business people, and they were proponents of some coherent theory or style of management, a style that is capable of meeting and managing the problems of higher education today. It is the style known as strategic dynamism. Strategic dynamism wants, and I quote Rector Dragis, "We need a bold, strategic, visionary leader to take us to the next level." Well, I know one of these, or one who claims to be, and I hope he's available this November. Strategic dynamism, you can ponder that a little bit. Strategic dynamism was also defined as staying ahead of the curve, of taking big steps in difficult times. Conservatives, it said, should back this. This comes from business, and conservatives are supposed to support business, aren't they? Well, how do we evaluate this claim? I evaluate it not by denying it, but denying the premise. The conservatives I know, and I'm speaking here of conservatives in business, know the difference between business and BS. Spouting of terms like strategic dynamism, which is fourth-rate jargon, as David pointed out, is pure nonsense. Who really wants PR babble like this to be identified with profound theories of management? I refuse to accept this. I read as a college student with and a graduate student with my mentor, James Q. Wilson. We read people like Peter Drucker and Chester Barnard. Take Chester Barnard, the functions of the executive. would have taken a look at this theory and called it nonsense. Among the rules he mentions in this long, interesting book, he says, to have an organization, this is what he defines an organization, to have an organization that secures the loyalty of persons is a complex and difficult task in efficiency, in all-around efficiency, not just one-sided efficiency. And to read that book is to see that the shibboleths of strategic dynamism, whatever it is, are not the shibboleths, are not the thought of those who really have thought about business and running organization. I'm sure the dean of the Darden School, I can't speak for the undergraduate commerce school at UVA, but I'm sure the dean of the Darden School would laugh at this stuff and laugh it out of court. So we conservatives, let's not identify ourselves with a theory of business that no sound business person or business educator would really adopt. Besides, if there is some coherent business philosophy in this slogan of strategic dynamism, if it is a model for how to run things, presumably then its proponents practice it. By their fruit ye shall know them. Its greatest proponents evidently included some of the leaders on the board. And how did the model work on its first trial run? It botched things. I don't care which side you're on this affair, for or against. It turns out everyone, and I mean everyone, agrees that this decision-making process was about as botched as you can imagine. Why, I ask, should conservatives identify themselves with a model that has failed? So I turn next to the question and ask, at any level, on any issue, in any way, in any fashion, did what the board expressed in any way resonate with what conservatives want to promote in higher education? Is there anything in these two words which would lead conservatives to want to identify with the Board of Visitors in this event? And I'm talking about the things that are important to us. Education in the liberal arts, in the experience of things beautiful. Education in those things that help to prepare some to be educated person who carry out and carry forth the tradition, and who in doing so know something about what it means to be good citizens and good persons, and who know how to think critically and deeply. Was anything of this sort ever mentioned in the 2 weeks of debate on this issue? The answer is no. I don't necessarily condemn the board for this. Maybe it wasn't the subject of discussion, but to say that somehow this was something to which conservatives should attach themselves when every conservative value and concern in higher education was not part of the program strikes me as an odd position indeed to ask of conservatives. Furthermore, when the idea was suggested that the Board of Visitors, or reported at least, was thinking of gutting classics in German, something which was denied, but in any case when it was suggested, did the rector and the board come out screaming and saying this is the last thing we would ever do? Did they make a public point of defending liberal education? No. When they came to appointing an interim president, did they name someone who was a champion of any of these things? The answer again, so far as I can see, is no. So far as I can tell, the board looked indifferent to the things that I think are important as a conservative in higher education. So, as I mentioned, the things we care about, the conservatives in higher education, involve the study of the liberal arts. We're concerned with civic education before global education, an understanding of our own, even as we try and understand the world, something which is in great jeopardy at our university. We care about a faculty that is not filled only with research interests and with specialities, but is willing to give at least 1/4 of its time to become real educators of young men and women. And other reasons as well that are really at the core of what we're thinking about when we're thinking about an important education. Another reason that worried conservatives maybe is more substantial, and David mentioned it. There's worries that a president now will no longer be responsible to a board of visitors, that the power relationship is reversed too much as a result of these events. They worry above all about a faculty becoming too powerful and trying to run a university, a horrific idea to think of, let me tell you. These to me are real concerns. Of course, the fault lies with the board, as David said, that their only worry was about their prestige, not that they had made the right decision in the first place when they went back on it. They were worried about boards And not only the board at the University of Virginia, but public boards all across the country. Will they now be too easily rolled by faculty members and by members of the community? I worry about this as well. It's an important point. But when you speak of the legitimacy of the board of visitors at the University of Virginia, it's still respected as our governing board, still something should be asked. On a board of a university, and as much as I favor the contributions of businessmen, I think that the board should have many, if not most, people in the business community. Still, on the entire board of the University of Virginia, there's not anyone who could be called an academic or someone interested, you could say, in the theory of education, or who has spent a lot of time inside education as an educator, a scientist, or an artist. And this is really something that the governors, the various governors, should answer for, and the board itself for not requesting it. It's simply unimaginable to think of a university not having an academic or an artist or an educator on its board of visitors. And how this arrived was one of the most shocking things I found when I looked at the list of board. All fine people, all devoted and dedicated to the University of Virginia, but a board without that, at least one or two members, is something that the governor should correct immediately. So what about conservatives at UVA then, the real ones? Well, almost all, I'll say all. I don't know every conservative, but heck, there aren't that many. Almost all that I know oppose the board decisions. I won't go through the list, but we could start with our distinguished economist, Ken Elzinga, a few people in my department, others scattered in various bastions, hidden under rugs at the university. All of them oppose the board decision so far as I know. Not because President Sullivan necessarily stands for the things that I mentioned. In fact, I don't know. I've never met President Sullivan, never spoke with her. I think the closest I got is I was driving a little too fast by the president's house and came pretty close to her as she was ambling across the street. But I've never met her. I don't know that many of my friends who have ever met her. I will say that over the course of the last 2 weeks, what I've learned about her suggests that she's quite impressive in very many ways. The portraits that came out in the Washington Post showed a very impressive leader. But that aside, it was not for this reason, I think, that conservatives at the University of Virginia took her side. We asked, what is a university? And especially our university, the University of Virginia. I don't really think very much helpful can be said about higher education. There are different institutions of different sorts. They have different purposes. The University of Virginia, if it stays true to its tradition, is going to be different than places like George Mason and Virginia Tech, both fine institutions, but different institutions. Generalities about higher education could be dangerous. So what about our university? What makes it special? A retired faculty member, a woman in my department, wrote a letter, I hope it's published in the Wall Street Journal, and then wrote me a personal note. Her name's Martha Durthick. But in any case, in a personal note, she spoke at length to me about one thing that's special about the university is that it has a remnant of a gentlemanly code, gentlemanly code of conduct, which makes it somewhat special, different than other places. Every human institution I know that's worth its salt has an ethos, something that's ingrained in it like the DNA of an institution, not visible or palpable. And I believe, without any other reason, the violence done to this code, which was palpable, was the reason that conservatives instinctively rallied to her side. Good. Thank you.
The American Council of Trustees and Alumni supported the Board of Visitors' right to take decisive action and embrace rapid change, including new presidential leadership for the university. We fully support the new resolve of UVA's leadership to work together rapidly to bring about UVA's best interests, and we commend the spirit of unity and reconciliation that it represents. ACTA deems it most appropriate to explain its position, and I really do thank the Hudson Institute for its kind invitation to be part of this panel. It's not only a decent respect to the opinions of mankind and to the very distinguished political scientist sitting to my left, that makes ACTA so eager to be part of this forum, but even more so, an opportunity to emphasize the urgency now recognized by both the board and President Sullivan to make this great university a more effective and more efficient institution. And speaking of effective institution, let me get this device. If it needs to be said, let me reiterate that the agonized and agonistic process of getting to this point of resolution to work cohesively towards a, quote, deliberate strategic approach was deplorable. Everything that Professor Caesar said is absolutely true about the breakdown of stability and process. My focus in these remarks, however, will be on the question of how to ensure urgent action rather than to analyze the flaws and missteps in the board's tactics. The crisis in American higher education is very real. I'm going to start with a few observations about national trends and then get right to the issue. What are the academic standards that Mr. Jefferson's university must uphold? And what are the structures and operational principles that enable and maintain those standards? Thus, three guiding questions. I'm just going to read the first one, and then we'll get on to the next slide. What does it mean to be educated at the University of Virginia? This is a question that I've always asked as an academic administrator. What gives us confidence when we see a student receive a diploma that we've done our work? Not that I've turned out somebody to go to graduate school in classics, or my colleague in engineering has gotten somebody ready for engineering, but what makes us think that we've educated our students? According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, in 2008, on average, America spent per pupil in higher education a staggering $29,910, which is more than twice the average of the other 33 industrialized nations in the OECD. They have a purchasing power parities that levels out the different currencies. The increase in the sticker price of tuition, which has a devastating impact, particularly on the middle class, is by now notorious as student loan debt breaks $1 trillion, exceeding American credit card debt. Actually, sorry, go back. The research of UVA's Josip Araksa and NYU's Richard Aram, published in Academically Adrift, shows a terrifying percentage of four-year college graduates who achieved little or no cognitive gains during their expensive college years. And lest any associated with elite institutions feel that that's somebody else's problem, the authors make it clear that the variation in outcomes within institutions is greater than the variation between institutions. Employers are none too happy with the quality of newly hired four-year college graduates. Some 400 employers who responded to a survey by the Partnership for 21st Century Skills in 2006, of those, 26% deemed the writing skills of new graduates deficient. One more time, 26%, they deemed 26% of the new graduates to have deficient writing skills. They found less than 1/4 with overall entry-level skills that were excellent. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tells us that the average worker age 18 to 44 will change jobs 11 times, and a number of these changes will come in a worker's late 30s or early 40s. ACTA's survey, What Will They Learn, suggests that higher education has overall ill-prepared its graduates for success in such a hard-scrabble job market. Oh, sorry. We'll get to UVA in a moment. That is... There we go. Sorry. And now to Mr. Jefferson's university. Jefferson, with his mastery of calculus, would balk at UVA's decision to make mathematics optional for students. I don't believe that this master of eloquence would be pleased to know that UVA students can be exempted from the first writing requirement. How would this founding father respond to the findings of ACTA's survey, Losing America's Memory? Would he approve of UVA's academic regulations that allow such courses as The Idea of the University, or Film Under Fascism, Ideology and Entertainment, or War and the Media? I stress, interesting and important as those courses are, to stand in lieu of a foundational approach to American history and government. Well, Jefferson gave us his thoughts explicitly in his 1818 report to the commissioners, and he was, to say the least, firm about the need for mathematics, science, and American government in the training of the students. So with this in mind, ACTA applauded the initiative of Rector Helen Dragas that accountability for academic quality and productivity must increase. It is the board's responsibility, she wrote, to ask for evidence that the current curriculum is meeting its stated goals, and also to ask how well any particular curriculum or program actually prepares UVA graduates. Yes, this has to happen. It has to happen expeditiously. It should happen in a process that is productive, of course. The rector was also right to be dissatisfied at the lack of evidence for academic effectiveness, the absence of, quote, a long-term program for assessment, reporting, and improvement. 13 North Carolina public universities, including the flagship, appear on the Voluntary System of Accountability website. Instruments like the Collegiate Learning Assessment, which undergirds Academically Adrift, yield crucial information about academic strengths and weaknesses. And the board's impatience for UVA to move on this front was appropriate. It is most unclear whether the board identified German and classics as programs to eliminate, and again, only a guess that the president's dissent was one of the breaking points between the parties. So let's imagine, and it is, I stress, only by imagination, that there was some Board of Visitors inquiry about these two programs. What would such a discussion sound like, and what would it say about the parties involved? German is a crucial academic program. I disclosed that I spent 15 months at the University of Cologne on fellowship from the German government. It's dear to my heart. But what's the state of it in the nation? It is endangered at many institutions. It is a very low enrollment program. The University of Southern California in 2008 abolished its program. In 2010, SUNY Albany and Louisiana State University announced that they were going to follow suit. Next in line is the University of Northern Iowa, and heaven only knows how many others are going to terminate their German programs. Meanwhile, 8 North Carolina public universities, responding to an initiative coming from their university's general administration, have created a German Studies consortium to share their course offerings. There is a partnership for a graduate program between Duke and UNC Chapel Hill. And a Russian consortium and Portuguese consortium are under consideration now. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, budget constraints have accelerated a program begun some years ago for low enrollment language programs. Suspended degree programs at the 14 campuses can reinvent themselves and become shared courses across all campuses. So what does this have to do with UVA and the possible threat to its German program? Well, UVA graduated in 2010-2011 2 undergraduate majors in German language and literature, 1 MA candidate, and 2 PhD candidates. The Department of Germanic Languages and Literature has a faculty of 15, 9 full or associate professors, 2 assistant professors, and 4 lecturers or instructors. In the midst of a budget crisis with tuition up 38% between 2004 and 2010, would it be so unreasonable, if these questions were in fact asked, to raise questions about a more cost-effective way to have a German program and not to go the way of University of Southern California and Louisiana State, and heaven only knows who else. In 2010-2011, UVA graduated a robust 18 majors in classics, and let me again disclose I was for many years a tenured professor of classical studies, but only 3 MA students and no PhD candidates. Might it be worthwhile for UVA to consider what 3 University of California campuses have done in forming the tri-campus graduate program in classics to share resources and hold down costs. UVA has 11 professors in the classics department. Its course offerings are wonderful, but is it sustainable in its present configuration? That is a legitimate question to ask, if indeed it was asked. The teaser for this discussion, if I could say that, Bill, asked, how do we balance financial and academic bottom lines? Business innovator Clay Christensen is very clear about the disruptive innovation at hand. Successful institutions will grow their way out of the fiscal crisis. I don't think anybody would call Clay Christensen a fourth-rate thinker. This deserves very serious consideration. And if you live in Northern Virginia and you have children, you can see plenty of reason and opportunity for growth at UVA. But it will not happen if we continue to think of an academic year based on an agrarian calendar with a long summer hiatus. It will not happen when expensive laboratory and classroom space is underutilized, and we know from the Chev reports that UVA does not meet state guidelines for usage even during the semester. I could not find the data reported, but I'd be curious to know how effectively UVA uses its buildings at, say, 8 a.m. or on Friday afternoons. Most of ACTA's studies of classroom utilization around the country show that those are dead zones. And I could think of many worthy students who would be happy to be in class, given the opportunity to be there at 8 a.m. or Friday afternoons. Most important, the growth that UVA needs will not happen if we hold sacred that teaching more than 2 courses a semester on average is an unreasonable burden for tenured or tenure-track faculty. I realize that's a heretical statement, but I make it anyway. These sorts of changes are not easy. But if the president, her staff, and the Board of Visitors have taken the last 2 weeks as a wake-up call, UVA can be a model of academic excellence and public access. Exactly what I think I have the right to say Mr. Jefferson would have wanted. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. As I customarily do, I'm going to poke the hornet's nest a little bit here. And I'll begin, since Mr. Poliakoff is outnumbered 2 to 1, I'll ask a question of the company from the University of Virginia, and especially Jim. Mr. Poliakoff's observations about the problems with higher education today are widely shared in the conservative world. I mean, if you look at any of the blogs, you read about the higher education bubble, which is the next, the next thing after the real estate bubble to burst here momentarily, and in large measure because of all of the inflated costs that we've talked about. And I can imagine, Jim, and I don't know Mr. Brenneman well enough to say this about you, but I know Jim fairly well. Under other circumstances, you could sit on a panel in which you would have all sorts of very harsh and critical things to say about the university today, along the lines of this slide showing that, kids know, who Beavis and Butthead are rather than who General Washington are. And how do you handle that kind of critique? I mean, the defense of traditional liberal education, the conservative defense of traditional liberal education, is almost a defense without an object today, given the state of higher education.
Well, don't get me started. And I think I indicated I have serious reservations about what other trends that have been going on at UVA. Many of those right. Michael spoke to eloquently. Absent the particular events, I think probably 95% of what he said would be things that I would say. The failures of UVA have been very dismaying. He spoke, for example, of teaching loads. It's interesting, to say the least, to see many who come in as younger professors who are under the illusion that they're going to be able to follow the sorts of careers that people follow at say, Princeton, Harvard, and Yale, where they teach 1 or 1.5 courses a semester. It's not going to happen. They should be told. Not only that, they should be told that they not only have to teach undergraduates, but they have to give at least, as I said, a quarter of their time to thinking how to teach undergraduates in a serious way that contributes to their undergraduate's education. The curriculum at the University of Virginia in the Arts and Sciences is a travesty, I would say. I think Michael pointed to some of the courses. I'd say too many students end up taking what we call fifth courses. One interesting course out of 5, okay, film and this, why not? They have, but all of them? I have students who, in a sense, take 5 fifth courses. And after 2 years at the University of Virginia, some of them have not seriously read any book, any serious book, any serious text. They may have read textbooks, they may have had good courses, but they haven't come to read a serious work of literature philosophy. Surely it would be possible with the proper leadership to agree on a basket of 6 or 8 things which students should know, even let them choose 6 out of the 8, and make sure that after 2 years they would have a very good chance of being exposed to those 6 or 8 areas. And I know this too from speaking with the students. You think the students want choices when they come in? That's wrong. They really want to, in a way, be instructed. Maybe not take every course, but here's a list of 8 things you should know. Take 6 of them. They're looking for guidance far more than for a smorgasbord of courses. So we could go on and on and on. I guess the only problem I have in all of this is linking this to the decision on Teresa Sullivan. As I said, I don't know the person. She's been there 2 years. If you want to fire someone from this, fire our last president. He was a good person too, John Castine. In 2 years, this is not going to fall into the bailiwick of the president. If you understand a complex organization like UVA, the usual way it works is the president, the first thing they would do will be to hire a provost who's more or less the full-time academic operating officer, more than a president. And she did so. I think there was, from what I know, I'm kind of an outsider at UVA, if you, that I'm not in on the decision-making processes, but with the people that I speak to that are, they're very impressed with this person who's been there like 9 months or so. So we have no disagreement, I think, philosophically, but to make this the basis of a firing of a person struck me as being a violation of all codes. And then I make the point I did make. I have no indication from anything that the board said that they were the champions of what Michael was speaking of, or if they were concerned with that. Where was the discussion of this? Where was the putting of the first things first? I would have no confidence that the result of a president hired by this board under those circumstances would be more devoted to these things than the current president, whose views, as I say, I don't know exactly on these issues. I add one point. The hiring of a president, especially in today's modern consultative era, isn't so easy. It takes, after everyone is consulted or the illusion of consultation is preceded, it takes 13 months or so. I know how long it took to hire the last president. Here, President Sullivan's been here for 2 years. She's going to be eliminated. You're going to have an interim president and then another president, 2 years without a president. Now, unless this person who's president is pretty bad, or unless you have in mind someone's pretty good, this strikes me as an act of such rashness and imprudence as to defy comprehension. I think this was the feeling of many who, as I said, really didn't quite know who stood for what, and still don't know exactly who stood for what.
Please.
I won't jump into the curricular matters except to say that I have a lot of sympathy with, I'm a former liberal arts college president at one stage in my checkered career, and I believe deeply in these institutions that do it right. I think we're still trying to overcome the events of the late 60s, which in a way threw the whole curriculum into a cocked hat. My first teaching job was at Amherst College in 1970, and we voted the last shred of what had been a very tightly constructed curriculum out the window. We turned it into a smorgasbord, 36 courses. And I think institutions are still struggling to come back from that episode, and that's 40 plus years ago. On the cost side, I should just mention that the major signature initiative of President Sullivan was to completely revise and change dramatically our budgeting system internally. We had historically, for the past 20 years at least, operated on a pretty much a pure historical, the classic, you get what you got last year plus anything that comes in, and if there are cuts, you get it across the board, and there's no strategery involved in any of it. I mean, it's just, simple-minded stuff. And that's the way we functioned. I was a dean for 12 years. As a dean, I had no incentives. Didn't seem to matter if I raised my enrollment, didn't change my budget. If I cut students, didn't change my budget. If I went to out-of-state students, didn't change my budget. The only incentive I had was to raise private money. That is not a good way to generate efficiency in a organization like the University of Virginia, nor is it wise to think you're going to do this top down. What Terry was bringing in was a model which is not unique by any means to the university. She was bringing it partly from the University of Michigan, but USC, Penn, Harvard, and Harvard's every tub at its own bottom has been around forever. Various names, responsibility-centered budgeting or activity-based budgeting. Essentially, it takes each of the schools and empowers the deans to be more involved in determining the fate of their own schools, in that they earn a share of their own tuition, they pay a negotiated share of the overhead burden, and it causes them to take a look at an under-enrolled course or an under-enrolled field and make a hard decision. If it's quote losing on the budgetary front, I make a decision. I either reduce it, or I shift it, or I decide it's so important to the mission of the school that I subsidize it out of the earnings of my other revenues. And that model, which is not easy to implement, and she was working hard to do it, is really, and coupled with the buy-in of the faculty that she was getting through her other, I think, very adroit human skills, that's the vehicle by which you get change in a university. The kind of nonsense of talking about strategic dynamism ain't the way to do it. That isn't going to get you to first base. It won't even get you past home plate.
So, Mr. Polyakov, trying to bring together the two arguments here, you point out the deficiencies in the curriculum, and I think there seems to be quite wide agreement on this panel that the university in general, and to some degree the University of Virginia, is struggling with content, and trying to restore some liberal arts education to the school. Nonetheless, was there any evidence, and this goes to a point that Jim made, was there any evidence that the Board of Visitors had any such larger substantive concerns or interests, or was it all a kind of a repetition of sort of third-rate buzzwords from the Darden School, and this is. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
That's a very good school.
Oh, it is. No, you're quite right, and I know. I'm sorry.
No,
I apologize. I have a reputation for being somewhat jaundiced about the application of business concepts to non-business. Right. But what in the action of the Board of Visitors did you see that went to this problem of the substantive content of liberal education?
I think we all have to be completely candid, and Jim Caesar put his finger on it quite clearly. Every word in the rector's 10 points, or in President Sullivan's 12 pages of strategic thoughts in her memo, every word is going to get parsed. There will be a series of competing hermeneutics about these documents, probably far outweighing the amount of time that was ever spent composing them.
I teach college courses on these documents.
So, in all candor and humility, we're groping, and I'm groping even more than the others. I wasn't there at the epicenter. However, my best guess on what might well have set the board off, and I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, was a feeling that there was very conventional thinking. It's more what wasn't said in the last couple of years. And again, I agree with Professor Caesar. 2 years is a fairly short time, except for the fact that every year there are hundreds, if not thousands, of worthy students who won't get opportunities because of bad management, bad structures, and poor curriculum, an absence of assessment and, real assessment that will guide better education. So I and my organization do tend to feel quite impatient about seeing change. For better or worse, Teresa Sullivan is not Michael Crow. We were not hearing plans about a new American university with new schools that would break departmental lines. There was some of that in her strategic memo, but nothing like the $13 million a year that ASU has been saving since it reorganized so many departments. We were not hearing the kinds of signals that would indicate that there was going to be the real push towards access and excellence. Why that set off the Board of Visitors and why the fuse was so short, I don't know. But I do come back to ACTA's basic point that across the nation we are in a crisis, and that crisis affects UVA, and impatience is a good thing. There are better ways of expressing it than the way that the board did it. That was clumsy, it was uncivil, it broke all sorts of academic protocols. But I still want to give some credit to the spirit that underlies it, that things must change, and we don't have a lot of time to waste.
Let's go to the audience. We have a terrific audience. Kath is here, I'm sure, have a question. Amy would love to ask a question, right? You're right down second row here. Please speak very, very directly into the microphone.
Yes.
Identify yourself. Amy
Cass, Hudson.
Yeah.
Michael, imagining yourself as a member of the board, what were you hearing from Teresa Sullivan that might have given you pause?
Or what weren't you hearing?
What weren't you hearing?
Yeah, that would.
I mean, you admit that 2 years is not enough, but what were you hearing? You as envisioning yourself as a member of the board.
I would have been very bothered by a budget with 4.2% growth. I would have been very worried, as was explicitly stated, by the peril of a board that is, of a budget that is depending so heavily on clinical income. But beyond that, it would have been the silences that would bother me. At the inaugural conference on assessment, I didn't hear anything about the fact that we have this remarkable scholar, Josipa Ruxa, on our campus, who could really lead us to become much more scientific about teaching and learning. I didn't hear anything about a totally new vision of how we ensure that students leave with the critical thinking skills that they need. I didn't hear anything about the cries of distress that are out there from employers about lack of basic skills, indeed even from the students coming from the most prestigious institutions. That was, if that was said, I didn't hear it. I didn't hear anything about any recognition that these low enrollment programs, crucial as they are heavily imperiled, and that we need a new vision to make sure that a great institution will be able to continue them, but continue them in a way that will not deny the resources necessary for sound general education, outstanding professional training, strong majors. It was the silences that would have bothered me on that board. But again, I am speaking here from somebody who was not there.
Did anyone want to?
Can I just put something on the record, since on the I don't know German issue, but no one really cares about these things. The statistics and on the classic just happened to be, in this case, very misleading. It was 1 year in which there were no PhDs. In fact, it produces a large number of PhDs relative to other classic programs who are prominently placed, and has a large number of undergraduates as well, sometimes in courses in the languages, but sometimes in courses in history of classical world. It wouldn't fairly be placed under a program that's under pressure. It's a distinguished. That, of course, no one outside can or should care about. As for Germanic studies, I'm not sure. I don't have my figures on it, but so many friends in classics would have not wanted me back in Charlottesville unless I reminded them of this fact.
Sure, go ahead.
And again, I have to say for the record, I know and admire these people enormously, but let me give you a comparison. We used 2010 because it was the most recent set of records we could get from federal data. The job market is pretty bad, and if they're getting tenure-track positions, they are among the most fortunate. You know, another separate conversation is how many PhDs we ought to be turning out all over the nation, given where we are now. But let me put side by side with UVA Hillsdale College. 100 students start Latin every year. 30 students start Greek on average in the school of 1,100. With a very robust number of majors. How many people teach in that department in Hillsdale College? 4. Now, of course, they teach 4 courses a semester. When I taught at Hillsdale, it was 5 because we had to cover the turf with only 2 of us. I'm not advocating that UVA, a R1 university, go to a 4 and 4 teaching load, but these are the trade-offs. 11 professors is a very, very big workforce. Sorry to use that term. I did do a glance at salaries. Annually, salaries alone are over $1 million. In classics. Not that they don't deserve it. I want to keep stressing that. These are fantastic, productive scholars. But there are hard choices in front of us. How do we share our resources with other universities, maximize impact? That's the kind of conversation I would like to see the university have.
Okay, I'm an economist. That's $1 million on a $2.6 billion budget. I mean, I call that rounding error. If you think you're going to solve the university's problems by wiping out the classics department, you don't know what you're talking about. Pardon me.
But as someone who knows a great deal about measuring outcomes in higher education, and someone who sort of defends the current state of affairs at the University of Virginia, what would you suggest by way of an approach to this? I mean, because it is, the question does have to be answered. And
I agree.
And Jim can't answer it because he's not an economist. He's
well,
definitely.
I've worked for 20 years with a gentleman named Pat Callan, who in various iterations, most recently ran a national center with Jim Hunt as as the chairman, and we put out 5 annual reports, biennial reports on the state of performance of American higher education, called Measuring Up. And I think we were among one of the first to say, we looked at preparation by state, participation, completion, big issue now, affordability, big issue now, and then we said this is a report card. It was a benchmarking exercise. What state does these things best, and how does everybody else relate to them? Was learning. We said, we're doing a report card. What do we know about learning? First report we put out, we didn't flunk everybody, we gave everybody an incomplete. This is an area that, in all honesty, the universities have not addressed as a separate issue from courses and grades and GPA. I mean, you, I suspect as a professor, feel that you evaluate your students in the courses you teach, and the sum of 36 of those becomes the evaluation of the institution. Now, that is no longer viewed as acceptable And we've been pushing, I've been pushing for a decade along with others in working more and more toward, we've used the collegiate learning assessment, we've used all kinds of things to try to get these measures out. But it's hard. It's not like No Child Left Behind. It's not like just reading and math at the 3rd grade level. You've got a complex set of curricular materials. You've got a very heterogeneous set of institutions. Is remedial math at MIT the same as it is at Piedmont Valley Community College? Probably not. What does it mean? So there's work afoot, but it isn't going to happen in 22 months, and no president is going to come in and be able to get this thing done and settled into everybody's satisfaction in 5 years. I mean, you got to work on it, and it's a big project.
Let's go to the back, please. Yes, gentleman here.
Yes, thank you. Rob Colorina. I'm an alum. I'm on the diversity board for the school. 2 quick questions. One is the fact that the state administration got involved in this first go around. As I recall, it was sort of there was 1 voted against, and you had two abstain. But the state administration came back saying we wanted a unified decision amongst the board. I was curious, Michael, if you have some commentary to that, if there's precedent to that, or did you expect that kind of wording? And then secondly, it seems like from a BOV type basis, you had a couple of donor families in particular who came out publicly saying that they're going to freeze their continuation. This is something you're more of an expert on. Your views on that, because that circles back to some of the commercial aspects as well.
I think we've got to make sure we have the right wording. The governor did not ask for a unanimous decision, but he asked for the board to come to a decision and to stop the divisiveness. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think unified.
Yeah.
Was
Unified,
maybe,
yeah.
Unified.
And that struck me as a completely reasonable thing for the governor to say, stop fighting. He did not say that you had to unanimously stop fighting. Nobody tells the Supreme Court it's got to be unanimous, but come to a decision and live with it, move on. That was the very least that could be asked from a public institution. What about donors? ACTA has always maintained that donor intent is about as sacred as you can get. And donors have every right to tell an institution that they will or will not give money depending upon whether that is a cause that matches their funding objectives. I don't consider that at all inappropriate. I wish there were more of it when donors think long and hard. Is this cause, is this institution actually fulfilling the goals that I want to give my personal treasure toward?
Just one brief word on that. I mean, we had people, high income, high donors on both sides of this issue. Whether it netted out, I don't know. But we had a conservative hedge fund manager write a letter to the newspaper, the local newspaper, saying, he was all in favor of the board's action, and implying his money wouldn't be forthcoming, or would be forthcoming because they did it, or wouldn't be forthcoming if they reversed it. I'm not quite sure what he was really saying. And then we had some people, you quote, on the other side who were shocked that the institution they'd given so much money to was behaving this way. So I think that was a contested area.
Yes, but yeah, why don't we go down front? Sorry, right, yes, right here, sorry. You're going to get a workout today.
Yeah, I'm Dale Hill. I'm an alumni from the first class of women, 74. Kenneth Elzinger was one of my professors. And I am a monitoring and evaluation specialist and an economist. So, I was very interested in your saying that one of the things Teresa Sullivan introduced was just getting the information in the budget, which is what really, I think, has to be the foundation for making decisions on how do you move forward and, what are the nitty-gritty details. So my question was going to be a bit about that, but I think you answered it. My other question is the composition of the board. I agree that it's inappropriate to have all businessmen, and yes, maybe have some academicians, but what about public policy people? What about some people who are representing people that have worked for civil society or government? So I guess I don't even know how the board is decided. So I would like your commentation on that, commentary on that.
Well, let me tell you how it's decided, and then Michael, whose organization specializes, can answer your. The 16 picks are purely picked by the governor. I mean, there we have 16 board members. I guess technically we've gone to 17. You said it. And we have, as you know, the state of Virginia is the last state in the nation that has a one-term governor, 4 years. There are 16 board members, four roll over every year. So in 1 year, in one term, a governor can completely reverse, change the order, the membership of the board. In this case, of the 16 board members who were on the board when Terry Sullivan was elected, 8 of them were gone and 8 were still there. And I think it produces a situation that people never even figure out where the restroom is before they're almost in their 3rd year. So it's not stable. It should be there should be a different way of picking people, but I now defer to the more expert.
Having trustees, regents, visitors who understand the academic mission is obviously very important. These are choices that need to be made with real insight. Having the governor appoint the members of a public board is appropriate because the governor is elected, accountable. As we could see in this last episode, the governor understands in a very immediate way that if his appointees mess up, that's a bad reflection on him. He will be accountable. And we need that immediacy. So in terms of the actual appointment process, this makes a lot of sense. Now, composition is a very, very important part of the quality of the board and the accountability of the appointer. Getting academic expertise makes a lot of sense, although I hasten to say that the idea of a lay board is one that has been time-tested. It is very important that the board not be at the under the influence of any particular constituency. It is the only entity in governance that should not have a dog in the fight except the well-being of the institution and the public, in the case of a public institution. Faculty, for good reason, what makes them great is their allegiance to their discipline. It is challenging, as Professor Caesar has pointed out, to get them at times to go beyond their discipline to think about what is education at the institution, to move beyond the departmental and disciplinary loyalty and passion to a larger sense of, well, yeah, my course shouldn't be required, but the math department sure should have a slot in the core. I mean, that kind of public-spirited decision is often a difficult one to get from the constituencies that are at ground level. A president, and this is not taking away from any particular president, will always live in fear of a vote of no confidence. The president is not a free agent. So having a board that can preserve that kind of independence is a crucial part of governance. One wants a well-informed board, a board with the kind of experience and open-mindedness to learn that will make them effective, all the members effective. But certainly the idea of people who are not necessarily coming from the fabric of the academy is not a bad idea.
Yeah, Jim, normally you would, I suspect you would be appalled at the kind of academics who might be appointed to the board at the University of Virginia, and you would yearn for the day when there were nothing but businessmen on that board. You would point to that as the good old days when conservatives had at least one voice someplace in Charlottesville.
Right. No, if I have to disagree a little bit with my faculty senate, I do not personally favor a UVA faculty member on the board. What I do favor is telling the board, just reminding them, let's say teachable moments, reminding them of the governor, look, this is a university, put on a couple of people who can speak to this in some ways to mix with the business people. It's been, I think, a mistake of both of the last governors not to have done that, and this is a chance for them to correct it. Recognizing, as I do, the importance of the business people, but just, and professionals, and some of whom are, the other professionals, they have them, you know, it's not just business people, but there should be a little bit more of this, and it's not really to the credit of a great university, or at any rate, wanting to be a great university, not to have a more intellectual account, understanding of the university right there on the board. Michael, I think I could suggest you as a good board member who could bring something like that, could bring together a lot of experience, which I doubt is available to many of the people on the board, given what their life experience is.
Yes, just.
Hi, I'm Kate Birmingham, and I'm with the Philanthropy Roundtable. My question is partly to Mike and partly to Dr. Caesar. The first part, one of the issues that you had mentioned that employers are unsatisfied with the writing skills of recent graduates who they're then employing. So my question is then, why the response of all sorts of new strategies in higher education, particularly online learning, and you know, whatever manifestations strategic dynamism might take on at a university setting, why not, you know, back to the basics that so many conservatives champion about reading great books? Isn't that how you become a great writer, by reading great books and great texts? And doing so under the tutelage of a professional who's done this, you know, presumably for several decades and can kind of guide you in the right direction. And then the other part towards Dr. Caesar, maybe is it not perhaps time then for conservatives, both in and outside of the academy, to admit that there is maybe an incongruence between their desire for or appetite for these kinds of new innovations and true conservatism? Isn't that maybe sort of a veiled kind of progressivism, that we're trying to bring in all of these new practices and measurable outcomes that are just kind of ill fit for the skills that we ultimately want to instantiate in our young graduates?
I don't think there's, sorry, yeah, thank you. I don't think there's anyone either at this table or in the audience that would disagree that writing quality is a crisis. It is a crisis in K-12, it is a crisis in higher education, and it is a crisis among the members of the workforce. How do we solve that? It's not often that I find myself agreeing with Stanley Fish, but Stanley Fish actually even agreed with ACTA in print in the New York Times on the basic point that students need a dedicated writing course. Writing across the curriculum is great, but it is not the same as holding students accountable for the mechanics, for coherence, for finally eloquence and rhetoric. That's a course all to itself. It's the reason why ACTA does not give credit for the general writing across the curriculum. I think one thing that we probably would agree on at this table is that there's been way too much cliche mongering and rhetoric in college catalogs. Everybody believes in the liberal arts. Very few are willing to walk the walk. Everybody believes in the importance of writing. A school that is responsible will ensure that there is good writing and might even go the next step, if necessary, to test that with a real instrument to be sure of their effectiveness. Yes, reading great literature is, of course, one of the ways that one acquires a real sense of style and grace, but that also needs to be accompanied by the detailed, meticulous work and the mechanics of writing. We've been sabotaged at almost every turn. When the National Council of the Teachers of English publishes a polemic against diagramming sentences and the tyranny of grammar and whatever else they're saying, this is a disaster that higher education inherits, but the buck stops with higher education. And it's simply got to take the action it needs with that required course.
Before Jim answers this question, Leon, does the question bear on this one by any chance? Okay.
All right.
Well, just
You-
br-
you've-
yeah,
d-
just very briefly.
You have to answer a young lady who uses the word instantiate.
Yes.
And this,
Right.
this is a pretty impressive, so.
Yes, if she could define it for me, that would be better still.
Well, it's not impressive.
Well, I say on this, I'm a little bit sort of sink your bucket down here, which is an old expression. Is look for what are the strengths already in your place. I'm maybe this is a little old-fashioned. I'm very dubious, however much maybe it's necessary for all this testing and assessing. This seems to me to be maybe not necessary for a place that is of high quality. I believe in hiring people that have the right spirit, the right training, the right dedication, and that this profession, namely the profession of education, I call it a liberal profession. Liberal meaning it's you police yourself. That's what I look at, and I like colleagues who police themselves, that don't get into my business, I don't get into theirs, but who are dedicated to the same thing. I think if you get a group of people who have that attitude, who are the core of your faculty, that most of the things that need to be done will be done. If you move some of the administrators out of the way, if you move the constant foolish assessments out of the way, maybe these are necessary in the world, but this seems to me to be the attitude towards other places than a place like UVA, or that I would like it to be. So that's a kind of my view. Hire the right people, make sure they're devoted to the tasks of the university, have a president and a dean that really is concerned with who the personnel are. Everything comes down to personnel. And you know, a person who's devoted to teaching or research, those are the ones who are going to make the place work. So fine with a little bit. I can't fill out forms very well. I don't like to do it. Maybe it's the age in which we live, but that would be my solution. And go back to the traditions of a place. Look for what you can find in it that led it to be a significant institution.
Yeah. Leon, last question. And as you answer this question, bear in mind this will be your
Our perorations now.
This is your peroration.
Yeah, Leon Cass, AEI. I found this very interesting, both for the concrete comments about the UVA situation and Michael's attempt to raise certain more general questions. And I'm struggling on the basis of what I heard to see whether there are any larger generalizations about this problem that one might go away with. Jim Caesar explicitly saying that there was probably, he didn't see any larger implications, and most of the discussion has been about procedural errors and stupidities in a local place, happily, at least for the time, being resolved. Let me offer just a couple of comments and see if I could draw you out on this. It does seem to me that the financial crises in higher education is going to lead various kinds of boards, however constituted, to put pressure on the institution and to raise questions about how the institution is run and whether they're doing the right thing and whether they're getting their money's worth by some kind of measure, known or imagined. That's going to continue. Jim Caesar would like, would like there to be a clearer articulation of what education is all about, and not sacrifice that to various kinds of economic interests, though he recognizes here that in the defense of the president, or in the discussion that's taken place, that didn't come up very much, and he'd be rather worried, I think, to have that kind of discussion come up within its own faculty as to whether the faculty would in fact agree as to what the overarching ends are. Third, Michael, for all of your concern about what the students aren't learning, you come back often to what the employers are finding wanting in our graduates, suggesting that the measure of success in the university is not some kind of ideal of making good citizens or learning of what a cultivated human being is, but preparation for the workplace, which is increasingly a way in which higher education is evaluated and judged, and therefore makes the business model, it basically concedes to the businessmen the right to say, are you giving us what our businesses need? And I'm sort of baffled, really, by, it seems to me we're going to see a lot more of this. And the question is, has this occasion been used to this point, and can it still be used to try to articulate some of the things that I suspect the panel shares in common once you get past the procedural irregularities, to say the least? Because I don't see that a proper defense has been made of anything other than civility and good procedure.
With your permission, I'll take a first
Yeah, please.
leap into this. Among other things, I write on the financing and future of higher education, and just finished a book on that subject with some colleagues. We're in a very strange place right now where, and in a way, I'm sorry this event happened at UVA, because one of the difficulties we have, and I mean by UVA as a type of institution, is that this country obsesses endlessly about a handful of elite institutions, and we study them, and that's all you read about in the newspapers. The big issues for this country of human capital accumulation and development and opportunity are being played out not in the UVAs, frankly, and not in the Harvards. They're being played out in the regional publics, the non-selective privates, the two-year colleges, and God blesses even the for-profit institutions now. Those are the ones that you never see written up. You never see the controversies. They don't have any of the options that a place like UVA has. They can't raise much money privately, except for the for-profits in a different venue. They don't have alumni donors, and yet we obsess on these handful of institutions. Now, the public research universities are, as a class, very nervous right now about their ability to stay in the competitive game with the private ones. You go back a few years ago, and the top universities would be about half public, half private. Now it's like lopsidedly private. Turns out betting on the stock market was a better bet than the state governments. I mean, that's what it amounts to. But if you look at what's happened nationally, we've had the president of the University of Oregon knocked off after less than 2 years. Richard LaRiviere was fired. Biddy Martin at Madison, Wisconsin, the president of the University of Illinois. I mean, the public research university presidents, that's a very tough job to take these days. Ironically, most of the presidents that have been knocked off, that I mentioned, have been trying to push the envelope and do somewhat more radical things, and they bumped right into the establishment that smacked them right back down. This is one of the flip sides of our strange situation, is you had a board pushing what might be called radical, wanting radical action, and you had a president that was sort of saying, whoa, that's not the way it works. So they slap her down. So again, I don't know if there's any general lesson to be said, but I think if anyone comes after you to be a public university president, be very careful what you say.
Thank you, Leon, for that question, and I think there are good answers to it. Let me start with something that will seem at first flippant. The title of Robert Hagestrom's book, Investing, the Last Liberal Art, which has a major chapter on St. John's and its preparation for somebody who's going to have a successful career in high-level investment. Now, what's he after? Why am I starting with this odd answer? I don't see that there is an inherent contradiction between a sound liberal arts education, which will be rewarding in helping a person live better, be a better member of the community, and success in career. Those things tend to go together nicely. I'm very impressed that our 4 military service academies all have really strong liberal arts curricula. None of the people who are being trained to be officers in our armed forces are allowed to get out of there without a literature course. I hope that this is because they understand that by wrestling with the difficult complexities of literature, we will have officers who will make decisions that touch base with many different ideas, not simply a pragmatic and often short-sighted approach. To study economics may be vocationally important, but at least ACTA believes everybody who goes through college ought to understand economics to be a good citizen. to be able to vote effectively. One of the things that amused me, if I may use that word, when we were wrestling with this idea of whether education should be vocationally focused or should embrace the liberal arts majors that tend not to have a specific career in mind, I looked at the employment prospects for structural engineering, which right now are terrible. Now, presumably a few years ago, parents would have been telling the kids, yeah, get a degree in structural engineering, you have a great job in front of you. Well, my guess is that the structural engineers who didn't acquire some of the basic liberal arts that involve writing and eloquence and understanding of history and economics are the ones who are now desperately searching around for a career. Foreign language proficiency. Isn't that what diversity and multiculturalism are all about? If you respect another culture, learn its language. So I don't see that bright line between what employers want and what's good for us as human beings, citizens, members of our community.
Jim, last word, if any. No? Good.
I might say.
Yeah. All right.
I will study economics.
Yeah. I have a question here, but unfortunately we're way over time, and so let's thank our panel for a terrific session.
Did you actually know Terry?
Nice conversation.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, we were in the same.